Sukhihotu, and welcome to the Buddhist Mahavihara's Facebook page this evening. Friday night, we have with us somebody who has been on the Dhammadana series here at the BMV's Facebook page a few times, I think more than 4 times already. And we're always very glad to have this Bhante with us because he speaks very fluently in English, and he's very erudite, and he's able to explain difficult topics to us in the most simplest of forms. Um, Without much ado, let me introduce Bhante or bring him on to the studio this evening to join us. Uh, Good evening, Bhante.
Good evening. Good to be
This
here.
is
Thank you for having
this
me.
is this is Dr. Chandana, Bhante Dr. Chandana. He's currently based in Hawaii in the USA. And Bhante is now wide awake, even though it's 2 a.m. now in Hawaii. Bhante, I hope you have enough coffee with you, Bhante, to keep you awake for the next hour or so. And Bhante will be talking on a very interesting subject. Sometimes I will call it even a sticky subject because some people find it very sensitive to speak on such a topic. And the topic this evening is, can we investigate our teachers? Now, before we go into the topic or dive into the topic, let me introduce Bhante properly, and let me read his profile for you, for those of you who have not met Bhante before. Now, this Bhante Dr. Chandana, is a bhikkhu and a student of the Dhamma for over 30 years. While teaching the Dhamma for over 2 decades, Bhante Chandana has a doctorate in Buddhist ministry, as well as degrees in psychology, marriage and family counseling, and comparative religions. Bhante Dr. Chandana was born in Beirut, Lebanon, to an Armenian family. Now, during the 17-year Lebanese civil war as a child, he was seriously injured with near-death experience, with the symptoms of PTSD and physical disabilities incurred, led to the development of a keen interest in his mind to gain a better understanding of life's true purpose, as he later came to appreciate the Four Noble Truths as taught by the Lord Buddha, especially given the constant presence of death, suffering, and impermanence at every corner of his life in Beirut. In 1995, he found his way to the College of Buddhist Studies, where he met the late Venerable Dr. Havanpola Ratnasara, who introduced him to Theravada Buddhist tradition and became his preceptor, giving him the name Chandana. Since then, he has been granted numerous recognitions, including that of Master of Dharma. It was Venerable Dr. Ratnasara Mahanayaka Thero who encouraged Venerable Dr. Chandana to start teaching the Dhamma over 22 years ago, when he was still an Upasika or lay Buddhist. Later, having met Venerable Dr. M. Punnaji Mahathero, who strongly inspired him to combine the Dhamma with Western psychotherapy and to help the Sasana that way. As you know, the late Venerable Dr. Punnaji Mahathero was a resident monk here at the Buddhist Mahavihara. I think Bhante has passed away now 3 years ago,
Mhm.
and he has now been a strong influence to Dr. Chandana. Now, in addition to his academic and applied backgrounds in the Dhamma and Buddhist studies, Bhante Dr. Chandana has extensive background working with patients as a clinical psychotherapist, having completed his degree and training in psychology and marriage and family therapy, while also being licensed in the state of California, USA. Thus, in addition to being a university professor, Bhante Dr. Chandana has worked with underserved populations as a mental health therapist, specializing in the areas of mindfulness, relationship health, anger management, anxiety, trauma, PTSD, eating disorders, and domestic violence, while using evidence based interventions inspired by his daily practice of meditation. Now, currently living in Hawaii, Bhante Dr. Chandana holds meditation retreats both in person and on Zoom with students from around the world, focusing on mindfulness, metta, loving kindness, and vipassana insight, as well as helping introduce healthier relational skills to bring happiness in people's lives while reducing their suffering through the increase of understanding. Now, for over 3 years, Bhante Dr. Chandana has taken the task of converting the Pali Nikayas into English by voice recording them and making them freely available for posterity. To this end, Dr. Chandana has often been retranslating many of the suttas in order to make them more relevant to today's listeners and especially practitioners of meditation. Bhante, Dr. Chandana has a book that's already been printed by the Buddhist Mahavihara. It's entitled The Buddhist Mindfulness and Lifestyle, and it is actually freely available from the Buddhist Mahavihara for free distribution. You can write to the Buddhist Mahavihara for copies of that book. To this end, Bhante Dr. Chandana is also translating this book into Armenian. So without much ado, I'd like to invite Bhante Dr. Chandana to start this evening's Dhamma sharing entitled, Can We Investigate Our Teacher? Bhante?
Yes. Let's start. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhamman saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami. Good evening. Thank you for having me again at Buddhist Mahavihara and allowing me to give a voice to this topic, which is, as Brother Leslie said, is a sticky topic, subject, and oftentimes is not talked about, shall we say. Lord Buddha did not leave us with a mediocre teaching. He left us the Dhamma, which is supremely well taught and precise. It is unmistakable. Swakato. We all are the custodians of that. And we bear a serious responsibility to uphold and protect it through practice, through understanding, through constantly working on ourselves, rather than just pretending. The Dhamma is the highest treasure the world has to offer. No one, no teacher is higher than the Dhamma. No teacher is untouchable, nor immune from being scrutinized, examined, whether they're in robes or not. So I want to mention those words first, because what I'm about to share here today may make some people rather uncomfortable, and I understand that. But if we don't address what needs to be addressed, then we would be continuing to be complacent, indifferent, and careless to stand up and protect what we still have of our Dhamma. But to do so requires us to be courageous and honest. Sitting quietly and minding our own business and having a laissez-faire attitude just won't cut it anymore. So this is, after all, what destroyed and wiped out Buddhism, the Dhamma, the Sasana, entirely in India centuries ago. It wasn't just the Muslim invasions, you know. We had neglected to stand guard and protect it within us first. To speak up when the Dhamma was becoming polluted, when it was getting dumbed down and defiled. People knew that, even back then. They knew what was going on. And they knew what was Dhamma from what was Adhamma, but they didn't address the issue. Each person for oneself. That's always the case. We have to start from ourselves. Now, sadly, It is happening yet again, but on a much bigger, larger, global scale. And it is spreading like wildfire. So, can we investigate our teachers? Absolutely. In fact, this Dhamma is the one, if not the only path, that allows us to do just that. In fact, it encourages us to do that. Vimansaka Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya encourages us. That's why it's there. Lord Buddha explains that to us. So this sutta is par excellence the magnum opus, if you will, within the teachings, where the Tathagata himself urges the student to examine and investigate. Not just any teacher, but starting with himself, the teacher, the great teacher. No other tradition facilitates such a move or gives a permission, official permission to the inquirer, the student, to go ahead and investigate the founder. So to investigate the teacher is necessary. And it's our responsibility as students to do that. So the Blessed One even gave us the permission to do it. So no one is immune from being examined. So no guilt there. So I wanted to put that out there so people could feel a little bit comfortable when the questions arise, if encountering certain characteristics in a teacher, let's say. But why do we examine? Well, that is why we have the Vinaya for bhikkhus and nuns. That is why we have the Dhamma. But often, common sense and just basic human decency are sufficient enough to highlight what is expected from our teachers. So, to address this, Lord Buddha insisted on the presence of wisdom, panya, in whatever we do, starting with whatever we think. Whatever we think. In the Upali Sutta, we see that, how Lord Buddha stresses the importance of mental actions versus physical actions, bodily actions, or speech even. Mental actions come first. So we must be able to investigate our teachers. But first and foremost, we need to have the willingness and the desire and the effort put in to investigate and scrutinize and examine ourselves. So, because ultimately, we can only have control over our own behavior and virtue. So how do we go about doing it? Investigating our teachers. Well, let me start by saying that we investigate our teachers with respect and compassion, with metta. That's crucial. And always with a genuine interest in perpetuating the Dhamma throughout. So we have that good foundation to begin with, and to have us carry through the investigation and not to allow it to be sullied or dirty with meanness, vindictiveness, or anything like that. So respect and our intentions in seeking answers while keeping the Dhamma in our sight throughout our crucial aspects of this investigative process. So basically, we cannot take liberties with the Dhamma through, let's say, irresponsible attitudes towards it. Whether we're teachers or students, we cannot take liberties with it. However, investigating or examining our teachers, again, we cannot become individuals who come from a place of vindictiveness or having a punitive approach. So that won't do at all. So in investigating, our inner and outer speech must have a unifying voice to it, not to break sasana, instead to unify it. So we have to have a unifying voice, caring, like a mother, like a father, like a caring individual. So our attitude, first of all, must be based on samadhi, right view. Right view. And this involves the absence of greed, hatred, or anger, and delusion, lobha, dosa, moha. But this also means that there must be accountability. Accountability. And in the case of the Buddhist tradition, to which we belong, as taught by Lord Buddha, our teacher, accountability comes in the form of us following the 3 trainings. And there's no exceptions to this, whether we're in robes or not. And the 3 trainings, just to remind you, Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Virtue, the building of virtuous behavior, mental cultivation, meditation, and the development of insight by going back to the suttas, studying, listening to Dhamma talks, gathering and then putting them into the experimental ground, which is our bodies, our minds, our speech in real life. From there, we will gain insight. So long as we have sati, panya will follow. Sati and sampajanya, they both go hand in hand. So there's no wiggle room here. We all must abide by the 3 trainings. And no, it doesn't matter how many vassas a person has under their belt, so to speak. That is not what makes a bhikkhu a Thera or an elder bhikkhu. We see that in the Thera Sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. So we have to be very careful. Decency must be embodied within the person. And it does matter more than a person's education, degrees, diplomas, recognitions, accolades, or empty titles. People see our behavior first, you know. They witness our attitude, our responses or reactions in situations. Not how many rains retreats we have. This is especially relevant because now we're living at a time period where we are not so close together. We are, but we're not that close. People observe and see us. And especially in urbanized world that we live in, where the Sangha is so spread out around the globe, where it is difficult to ensure that everybody's on the same page. Because of this, our behavior has to be foremost in making sure that we are staying with the 3 trainings, with the Dhamma, and not doing something, you know, on our own. And so we need to be very cognizant, whether we're living alone or in a community, because influences like renown, fame, growth, reputation can really be tempting, but at the same time they mean very little if the bhikkhu or the teacher is getting all those when it is not being backed up by virtuous behavior and character building. This we see clearly in the suttas, whether in the Thera Sutta, again from the Anguttara Nikaya, we see it also from in the Dutiya Uruvela Sutta, where we see who the Blessed One, the Tathagata, considers to be a Thera. Also in the Sila Sutta, among many others, of course. After all, it's crucial for us to deserve the titles we get. So we can't be resting on our laurels, as we say in English, as teachers. So it has to do with our living behavior and our lifestyle, which must reflect what it is that our titles represent, whether we're a teacher in lay clothing or in robes. So I feel like sharing some personal experiences here, given the time that we have. I find that it is very useful for people to connect. So personal experiences are number one in that. So I want to share those to highlight the state of the Dhamma in the world as I've observed it, as many of you have. Prior to becoming ordained for over 2 decades as a layperson, as Brother Leslie mentioned, I was authorized to teach by my late teacher, to teach the Dhamma, that is, and by Bhante Ratnasara years ago. And that happened in Los Angeles. So I was given the honor of going and speaking in different venues, different places, different countries. And usually that was and is taken care of by the dayakas, the supporters of the sasana, of different temples. So as I would go and do the teaching, sharing, as this was the time when I was an upasaka, a lay teacher, I would witness an interesting phenomenon. I would see that despite the temples being filled to the brim with lay followers who were eager to come and listen to the Dhamma, sadly, none of the monastics would be there. They wouldn't show up. And basically there was the attitude in the air that how could mere upasaka know anything about authentic Dhamma? Meanwhile, the laity would ask me to stay longer instead of the 1 hour or the 2 hours allotted originally. Desperately eager again to hear and listen to the Dhamma and ask questions, to learn some things from the Dhamma, perhaps learn something new altogether. And sadly, at the end, I remember this would bring tears to my eyes to see the discrepancy of what was taking place. Now, people see this, especially the laity, the supporters are seeing this, but most of us have chosen to be remaining quiet about it. So this is a kind of an attitude that has been perpetuated for some time now. And it's not something just particular to Asian countries, because I have seen this kind of a prejudice even in Western countries as well. But the way I understand it, it is that each of us are, as I mentioned briefly in the beginning, are custodians, protectors of the Dhamma. Granted, some of us more than others, yes. So we must be courageous enough to call things out the way they are, the way we see them clearly manifested, and stop making excuses for them, either what's happening or the teachers, the system. There's a saying, so long as there's a circus, you'll definitely be surrounded by clowns. Clowns will always be there, so long as there's a circus. So the circus here is, bluntly put, most people, the majority, the congregating crowd, if you will. And we all know too well how this world can become a circus, the way it has currently proven itself that it can. So the clowns are in abundance, whether it be in the educational, political, and especially given the context of today, in the spiritual and religious arena. So it is sad and a deplorable fact that not enough householders are being able to be taught the Dhamma today the way they want them. And this I have based it both as a layperson and also as a bhikkhu, traveling around the world. Last year I was traveling around the world in the middle of COVID and meeting different groups of Buddhists around the world from New Zealand to Milan to UK, other places, where US, where people would come and say, Bhante, I want to learn more, but I can't. There aren't the resources at the temple, at least. So we need to be taught. That's our job as teachers. So this must change. And I'm glad to say that today there are fellow bhikkhus who've been making free versions of the suttas available online. For example, we have access to Insight of Ajahn Thanissaro. We also have Bhante Sujato's and colleagues Sutta Central, and we also have a wonderful resource, the Minding Center and the Dhamma Farers from Singapore, done by Brother Piatan. So wonderful resources, free. So at least we can, as lay people, as not just lay people, by the way, we can use these resources beyond the confines of, let's say, the vihara or the temple. As Brother Leslie mentioned, I've been working on the Pali Suttas myself, and decided to record, and I've been recording with the well, I started with the Dhammapada, and I thought I would never finish it, and I did. And I chose the version of the late Venerable Kesri Dhammananda's beautiful, beautiful, lovely version of the Dhammapada. And I also included the background, history, commentarial portion of each of the Vaggas, the verses. And recently I've been doing the Digha Nikaya, I finished that, Majjhima Nikaya, and now I'm redoing the Anguttara Nikaya, which I decided somewhat in it that I'm going to go ahead and retranslate many of those to make it more specific to our time, and including all the missing parts. And in these suttas, I see, the reason why I mention this in particular is because I see so many lay people. We might have heard about the householders, specifically Chitta, the householder, who was the foremost in explaining the Dhamma, lay male disciple of Lord Buddha. He was also an Anagami. So was Hattaka of Alavi, and we also have Visakha, the householder. But in particular, Chitta, he would often teach the Dhamma to the Bhikkhu Mahatheras. Many people don't know that. But Chitta would teach, a layperson, Upasaka would teach Mahatheras who were struggling with some Dhammic issue, with some issue from the suttas they couldn't wrap their minds around. And Upasaka Chitta, leaving his business, would come and say, what are the venerable ones, after paying respect, what are the venerable ones are you discussing? And they would be lost in delusion in some question, and he would just explain it very beautifully, short, succinct, and they would show their appreciation. So it is the Dhamma in our hearts, that's what I'm trying to say, that makes us Buddhists. And sadly, it is the absence of Dhamma in our hearts that tells us that, in fact, we're not Buddhists. Let's remember, whatever's inside one's heart, that is what becomes one's reality, what we show and manifest to the world. So it's the authenticity of one's living the life of a teacher. As a person who studies the suttas, who understands their meaning and phrasing with metta and has an open heart, working on it day and night, putting the teachings into practice, while meditating on them to realize the truth of the Dhamma that is pure and complete, because that's why the Dhamma is there. We're not just, it's not there for us to just read and memorize and not do anything with it. It needs to be brought in, invited into one's life. Otherwise, Who cares about the Dhamma if it's just a series of teachings that are not applied? They're not ritualistic. They're not to be just memorized and that's it, leave it at that. No, they need to be turned into life. Because that's another term for Dhamma. It is life. Because it is the truth. It is pure and it is complete. And so it must be done. This inviting and this actively participating in the understanding of the Dhamma is an active process by one's own efforts. But at the very least, to go ahead and search out and study with those who can be termed as Kalyana Mittas for us, those spiritual good friends in the Dhamma, who can help us to taste Magga and Phala, the path and fruit of the Dhamma, here, now, in this very life. So especially us teachers, we don't have time to waste in this endeavor. We're not immune. The Dhamma doesn't care whether we're lay people or not. And we're not here to teach our supporters or listeners that the most they can aspire to is heavenly rebirth. That idea has to go, in my opinion. That is totally useless. Totally useless. Because that would be a sorry case for being born as a human being at a time period where the sasana of Lord Buddha is still alive and well. Why cut ourselves so short by just saying, well, the most you can do is heavenly rebirth. Just keep doing dana, you're fine. Forget about attaining nibbana. Imagine us saying that in the presence of Lord Buddha, the Tathagata. Would we be able to? I seriously doubt that. So the Dhamma is not about rites and rituals or pujas. It is about practice. Plain and simple, practice. Number one. Rites and rituals are not the practice. Let's remember, Lord Buddha made it very clear. Silabhata paramasa. Rites and rituals, remember? They're part of the sangyojanas, the fetters. The fetters bind us. They keep us prisoners. Rites and rituals. Pujas, if our faith in the Dhamma is simply on the puja part, we go to the vihara for pujas, we're practicing rites and rituals. Well, what is the difference between us then and all the other religions that were going on, the practices, at the time of Buddha or even today, other than the Dhamma? So we have to be very careful. Is our practice based on ignorance or wisdom? If it's just pujas, rites and rituals, it's definitely based on ignorance, plain and simple. So the Buddhist community of both lay people and monastics must be taught this fact. The fact is, the three trainings, sila, samadhi, panya. So we can't just be talking about, let's say, dana or making offerings. Yes, dana is important. Don't misunderstand me. But that shouldn't be the focus. That's too easy to teach anyhow. And I have so much to say, so I apologize if I am coming across as speaking too fast. So I apologize to listeners. But I just have so much to share here. So dana is so easy to teach, and I've seen this in different countries. In Sri Lanka, I've seen this in Indonesia, I've seen this in New Zealand, in Europe. But it's just so easy to teach. Let's be honest. Dana or generosity does not get us out of samsara, by the way, no matter what rewards we get. Even if you are close to Anathapindika, who is the greatest benefactor of Lord Buddha, eventually the time will run out. No matter however long of a time a person gets to be reborn in a heavenly realm, the bottom line is we're coming back. And very possibly not even make a stop at the human realm. but instead go straight down to hell and stay there for quite a long time, sadly. Along with those teachers who never taught us, or even worse, misled and disparaged our genuine longing, the desire to study and practice the Dhamma. We have to say it like it is. We can't sugarcoat things. Now the Dhamma is in danger. The Dhamma is always there. It's the teachings I'm talking about. The teachings that were left to us, for us, to practice by Lord Buddha himself. So by simply donning the bhikkhu's robes, we don't necessarily drop or relinquish our greed, lust for things and sensual desires, our hatred or anger, our possessiveness, nor our delusion or arrogance, or being territorial with our temples, which can be interesting to observe. The temples that we are given, which by the way, we're not supposed to even own anything. So sadly, it is more common to see many being tempted to even use the robes as a camouflage, as a cover, to hide our corrupt tendencies from ever being removed from the heart, which sadly turns this beautiful life, the noble life of a samana, into some kind of a professional priesthood that is mostly based on rites and rituals while keeping up pretenses. So we see numerous cases throughout the suttas and Vinaya. In fact, we have many. We have many. And many Devadattas, by the way. He wasn't just simply one example. He stands out, of course, because of some of the atrocities that he committed. But we have other Devadattas. They had different names, of course, but they were there. They've always been disparaging, trying to misrepresent Lord Buddha, the sasana, the teachings, the Vinaya even. So it's not just happening now. It was happening even at the time of Lord Buddha. But having said this, again, we have to stress how we also shouldn't be on a fault-finding mission either. So that isn't it. That isn't it. We have to protect the sasana, not break it. But we have to say things the way we are observing them. We have to be honest, responsible, but we have to do so, bring it forward and discuss it in a compassionate, wise, caring and responsible manner with accountability. So our work must be to strengthen and bring back a healthy engagement through the Dhamma, therefore support the sasana. With what? With our virtue. See, I can't expect someone else to be virtuous if I'm not displaying or living with virtue myself. So our moral and virtuous behavior, our meditation practice, and the growth in wisdom are paramount. And remember, so we need to go back to that 3 training formula, because however bad, however defiled people's minds are around us, however corrupt their hearts are, those aren't the things that will take us to hell. It is our own defilement, our own corrupt hearts that will take us there. Our corrupt and non-virtuous behavior will take us there, not somebody else's. But there's a win-win situation. By me going into working on my own virtue and standing up and discussing the virtue about the people around me, the sasana, we can take care of the sasana, we can lengthen its lifespan, which we desperately need to do, especially now. And we forget also how the first 20 years approximately of Lord Buddha's dispensation, of him teaching, there were no rules, there were no Vinaya, but people were living fine. We had the most number of arahants ever during those 20-year time period. But no rules. Imagine that. How was that possible? Because people were practicing what Lord Buddha was teaching. You didn't have a lot of putujjanas coming in to the fold at that time. Putujjanas who were attracted by, hey, I'm going to get a lot of free food, free recognition, this and that. So that's when the Vinaya will, because people were bringing in their corruptions, their defilements into the robes. So we need to be very, very careful, especially as teachers, to protect us from suffering and to bring peace and harmony into the community, to slow down the deterioration process and the corruption that's going on. And Lord Buddha saw this and understood this 2,600 years ago. That's what the purpose was behind the Vinaya, the way I see it. To protect it, to bring safety and safety from suffering, both for the bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, and also the community at large. He would always tell a person who had done a misdeed, how is this helping bring up faith in the lay community? How is this bringing faith in someone or enhancing the faith that they already have? What you did, he would say, foolish man, is to strip away that from people's hearts. Now that person who had a smidgen of a little bit of faith in their heart, now that is lost because of your actions. They lost faith in the sasana, and probably they are now stuck in samsara for a lot longer time. So we need to take, as teachers especially, personal responsibility, how we carry ourselves. Our lives must be the embodiment of the Dhamma. That's it. So not the honors or the renown, the fame, or I'm going to get this president or this king bow down to me. That was there 2,600 years ago, and it is there, it is here today, that mindset, unfortunately. So we must first be the examples and the role models for others to follow and to emulate and copy us. So let the copy or the model be a correct one that's based on the Dhamma and Vinaya. Let me not bring in my own stuff, my own issues, my own defilements into the mix. Everyone else is doing that in the world anyhow. So wrong intentions can drive us to do that. And so is my interest in being a teacher, whether a lay person or a bhikkhu, is it coming from wrong view, wrong intentions? Is it? Is my approach from that? So, and sometimes people say, well, this bhikkhu or this teacher looks very humble. They're very kind, agreeable. Well, as we see in the Vimansaka Sutta, Lord Buddha points this out beautifully. Again, 26 centuries ago, he says, simply because a bhikkhu demonstrate themselves on the outside, as, oh, he's very humble. Look at him. He's not being influenced by fame or fortune. He says, still wait. You can't make a conclusion yet. This is Lord Buddha, Vimansaka Sutta. I think it's Sutta number 47 in Majjhima Nikaya. And he says, first, you need to see and consider maybe this bhikkhu or this teacher hasn't been given the right conditions yet for those seeds to sprout, seeds of ignorance, of greed, lust, possessiveness, things like that. Wait, he says, they might not have those causes and conditions yet for those qualities to show up in the person. And sadly, I've personally seen this and witnessed such cases in my life, in my interactions with people, personally, professionally, and sadly, even within Buddhist circles, where a kind, humble teacher would be given a temple, becoming an abbot, and all of a sudden there's this 180 shift in the person's 180-degree shift in the person's character, which can be quite jolting, and many people would leave that temple, no longer be supporters, because people also have eyes. And so these are precautionary notes that people are seeing this, and we as teachers have to take extra precautions to make sure we don't live with such low standards. We live according to the Dhamma. So we need to scrutinize ourselves first. So as a layperson, we need to come out and, as I mentioned a few times, whatever we recognize and it doesn't sit well, it is the responsibility of us to come forward and discuss this, but discuss this with the teacher in private, again with metta, with wisdom, with responsibility, not in a pejorative or condescending or punitive, vindictive way. No. But we need to address this, because we need to address this with truthfulness and honesty, and because ultimately what the discrepancy, the inconsistency between action and behavior basically, and what the teacher is supposed to be embodying, this discrepancy, this disharmony creates much confusion and suffering in the dayaka, in the supporter, in the lay community that is supporting us with the 4 requisites. We have more than 4 now, obviously, even though it says 4, but we have tons and tons of other things that the lay supporters bring to us. Bring from where? From their lives, from their energy, from their energy, from their life source, from everything that they pour with generosity. But they're also in pain. If I am not living according to the Dhamma, they are, remember the faith part in the person's heart that Lord Buddha was talking about while establishing the Vinaya rules? That's still valid today, because many lay people are shaken. I've seen some of them come and approach me with tears almost in their eyes. They said, Bhante, because I was a visiting monk, they could confide in me, I guess. And they would say things, and I would see how much pain they were going through. This is called spiritual pain, by the way. When the layperson is suffering because they sense the faith leaving them because of what they're seeing visually, witnessing in the teacher, in the bhikkhu. And they look at themselves and like, I'm a layperson. I don't even have that tendency. I don't even have that defilement in my heart. That's what the layperson is thinking. How will I go and say this, describe this to my daughter, to my son, the future Buddhists? So this creates dilemma. On top of the fact that they're not getting any Dhamma. All they're doing is rites and rituals, pujas. They're making their donations. They're bringing food. They're supporting the temple. It's a cultural center most of the time. No Dhamma. No explanations in regards to the life difficulties and what Dhammic message could come in and help them, uplift them, and help them with the 3 trainings. This leaves the person in pain. And imagine, if I'm as a bhikkhu, because I can only talk about bhikkhus, mostly than just lay teachers, but if I as a bhikkhu am completely oblivious to this, or ignorant, or even worse, indifferent to the pain and suffering, why am I even there? Because I'm causing more harm, more hurt, more damage. Not just emotionally, psychologically, and therefore spiritually. So the sasana is much bigger than myself, the person. So we need to be very cognizant of this and hold ourselves to a higher standard. Fortunately, we have the Dhamma. And while we're on it, this is a distinction which I want to address as well. there is no allowance, no room for a so-called purely scholarly type or academic bhikkhu, as opposed to a practicing bhikkhu, a bhikkhu who meditates or lives the holy life. There's no such designation anywhere in the sasanas. He makes fun of them. Lord Buddha actually criticized so many suttas. You see this in the Mahaupadesa Sutta. You see this in the Thera Sutta again, Sila Sutta, again Vimansaka Sutta, clearly, and tons of other suttas where he's directly scolding those bhikkhus who either just know some suttas or know a lot of suttas, know the Vinaya rules, but they don't practice any of it. They just use it to stand out. Well, he was the first one to criticize them. So there is no designation of, purely, yes, we have that group of bhikkhus. Yes, they're legitimate. And we have also the practicing bhikkhus. No, the Buddha never authorized such a thing. He never validated that. He never, ever. I've never come across it in all the suttas, all these years. Not one example where he says, yes, you are, yes, I officiate you. You are the scholarly type, so you don't have to practice. There's no such thing. Because I've come across people who've said that. I'm not that kind of a bhikkhu, Bhante. I'm a scholar. I don't meditate. I've had people approach me and say that in robes. We have to say it like it is. We can't hide these things anymore. We cannot afford it. For the sake of the sasana, by our silence, we're actually perpetuating this. We're enabling such destructive, detrimental behaviors. Remember, the Dhamma is much bigger than us, and we cannot take liberties with it. So this whole idea of scholarly or academic bhikkhu, purely, not a practicing one, is, it's a purely bogus distinction. It's an illegitimate claim. And sadly, a tradition that was started by those who were too lazy to practice. Let's just say it like it is. And so we need to address that. And the commentators and philosophers had a lot to do with this, for creating this division, where even the lay people look at such a bhikkhu or such a teacher as like, okay, so it's okay. It's not okay. It's not okay. Why do we go forth otherwise? You can do that while being a lay person. There's a lot of lay people who are professors of Buddhist studies. I know quite a number of them around the world. They're doing it, so if you're that scholarly type, go ahead and do that. But if we're wearing the robes, we have to take the responsibility of practicing and really being the role models. And you don't have to be in robes to be a role model. That's why I said earlier, gave the examples of Chitta, Hattaka, Valavi, Visakha, to name a few. Anathapindika was another one, even though he didn't technically teach, but he definitely influenced his own family, all of whom became Arya Savakas, by the way, including himself. So our job is not to complicate the Dhamma or make it inaccessible to people. It's already very simple. Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sandittiko Akaliko Ehipassiko Opanayiko Pacchattam Veditabbo Vinyuhiti, to be realized by the wise for themselves. Most of the people who came to the Lord Buddha and became Sakadagamis or Sotapanna Sakadagamis, Anagamis, were illiterate. They didn't know how to read or write. They were people. They had faith. They were impressed by what they saw and what they heard directly from Lord Buddha and his students. But the Dhamma was simple. It wasn't complicated. It is beautifully accessible. Beautifully accessible. And it's immediately effective. Timeless. akaliko. So let's not forget that. But when we teach to people that, oh, it's very complicated, you have to know all the abhidhammas and things like that, which was a later development, by the way. People shun that. They say, oh, it's too much philosophy. It's too complicated. I've had people say that. Even as an upasaka, when I would teach, people would come and they say, oh, this is too much, too much. I say, why? And they would refer to some abhidhammic principle or something from the Visuddhimagga. There's too much dedication required. I say, no. Try this, try that. Venerable Bahia became an arahant very quickly, just from a few words from Lord Buddha. Simple words. So, if they could do it, we sure can. We sure can. The Dhamma is still alive, kicking and well. So, the whole investigation thing that we're talking about, the examination business and all that, it is simply geared towards bringing that aliveness back into our lives and making the Dhamma relevant in our lives with the help of the bhikkhus, the teachers, to come and help us. But we cannot do that through pretending, okay? We must learn the Dhamma. So, in essence, we become bhikkhus to liberate ourselves, to maintain the health of the sasana. And as we do so, we help others learn the Dhamma so they too can taste the fruits of the Dhamma for themselves. Meanwhile, we serve as their examples. That's what I'm saying. We serve as their examples in our virtue, in our meditation, personal experiences, meditative personal experiences, and our experiential wisdom. The way I understand it, our hearts, minds, and lives must be geared towards and anchored on the Dhamma. Plain and simple. And a thing to be mentioned here is, for this to happen, teachers must inspire, must, underline must, inspire us to get on the path, the Magga. The Magga, the Eightfold Path. We must inspire people to be on the path and to practice the path. Because the teachers themselves are supposed to be the representations of Lord Buddha himself. Lord Buddha. So we're carrying on a legacy. We don't just wear robes or the role of a teacher. We're in this tradition, we are carrying, as teachers, we are carrying the responsibility. Not just when there are cameras on us. Not when there's a whole group of upasakas and dayakas or people around us watching us. We need to be there, being our own observers, scrutinizing ourselves. That's key. Not hiding anything. And if we live like that, this makes it into an amazing standard for the teacher to hold oneself accountable to and to constantly check oneself against. And at that, moment, we see that we're no longer alone. We do see our frailties. We're human. But nevertheless, we continue striving and never take our lives as bhikkhus or teachers for granted. Anyhow, this is one of the ways that I know how a person can be inspiring. So the teachers' lives are supposed to be inspiring, to help increase the confidence of students. So as teachers, we're establishing ourselves and establishing others, our constituents, our dayakas, our supporters. In what? Establishing us in what? We establish ourselves in right view. Not wrong views. Pursuing greed, hatred, delusion, all these things, it's wrong views. And it has so many branchings of it. But we need to first be established. To be inspiring, we need to first be established in right view. and we need to help others also to become established. That's why we teach. And so whatever we do, say, think has to be established on the first of the Eightfold Path, which is Samma Ditthi. That's a powerful standard. Not the ones that we can make up for ourselves as we're living this life, because there's too many temptations. So in the Mahavedalla Sutta, in the Majjhima Nikaya, we see Venerable Sariputta describing how the things that, there's two things, he says, that establish a person in right view. He says, the voice of another and wise reflection. The voice of another always has to be related to the Dhamma. We're not like listening, talking over the phone about politics, about COVID, about this or that. That's not what Venerable Sariputta meant here. Voice of another as long as it's conversing and describing and inspiring us, basing it on the Dhamma. Giving you a sense of relief, hearing a verse from the Dhammapada, from someone, even if it's listening to sutta or something like that. And the second one is yoniso manasikara, which is wise reflection, wise attention. Those two things are crucial. And guess what, or who is the perfect representative of that? Us, teachers. So we cannot take things for granted. I cannot be fulfilling a job, playing the role of a priest, a professional role. It's a job. No, it's not. This is not a job like that. This is a life path. It's not a passive affair. We're not on the passenger seat while others take us. Going forth, the samana path. You know, an example comes to mind. When we purchase something, let's say a phone, a computer, a laptop, a car, and we like to test it, don't we? Especially if it's a bigger purchase. We like to test it, to see it, to walk through it if it's a house. Because if it's not working, like a phone or a computer, what do? We take it back. We send it back. Well, the same principle applies when we are hiring someone. Let's say a GP, a general practitioner, a doctor, a lawyer, the person, the accountant who does your taxes, people, a maid, somebody who comes and cleans your house. Now, that's their specialty. And a specialist must provide that specialty in full. Yes, we all agree on this in conventional terms, in normal life. How come that standard sometimes doesn't apply, if not always, when we're referring to our teachers? It should be the same. The standard must be the same. Because if I'm hiring, I'm not going into surgery under the knife by the surgeon working on me, putting me under anesthesia, because that's what I went, that's his specialty. But a mechanic is not going to be doing that, or somebody simply pretending to be a physician or a surgeon. You see what I'm trying to say? So the same principles or standards that we live by in normal, conventional life, world, responsibilities, need to also be brought into the sasana. No difference. Don't be fooled by the outside appearances, Lord Buddha says in the Vimansaka Sutta, like I mentioned earlier. So, and our specialty as bhikkhus is, again, not about chanting pujas for us or to provide us with some other type of rites and ritual practices. No, it is to provide us with the Dhamma, plain and simple, lived Dhamma. Pujas are just a very, 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 very small part of the life of a Buddhist. Very small. It brings the community together, fine, I get it. And it makes us feel good. But it shouldn't be the focus. Not even close. It's very small. But it's easy. It's good for us procrastinators. Complacency, all those, laziness. Yeah, I'll just read this, I'll just do this, I'll just go to the Uposatha thing, and then, yeah, it's fine. No. We are here to help people with the Dhamma, the service that ensures liberation for all those who come looking for it, asking for it when they visit the vihara or the temple or monastery. So my encouragement is that to maintain the sasana, the health of the sasana, the dispensation of Lord Buddha, to make sure that it still continues on, we need to bring in our own standards that we expect a person who has a, specialty, that juxtaposing in that on the role of a teacher, our teacher. So we have certain expectations. Because what happens when I don't get the phone to work? What do? The phone that I'm paying a lot of money for? Send it back. That's perfectly fine. So, because ultimately, to maintain the sasana, as teachers, there's the karmic consequence on us. Karmic consequence. That is the karma that is to be dealt on us. Because the teachers are the recipients of such faithful support from the dayakas, from the supporters, from the lay community. So we are getting a lot of that from them. So we need to at least do something, not just pujas. When I say something, it has to come from the virtuous behavior. Years ago, a therapist friend of mine said, trust the behavior, not the words. So if you can take anything from today's talk, from the Dhamma Desana, if that's it, that's beautiful. Trust the behavior, not the words. Words can be anything, but the behavior doesn't lie, especially when there aren't that many eyes looking at them. You catch them by surprise, as it were. And you don't have to just apply that to the teachers, but you can apply it in your life, in your business world, and whatever, friends, social circles. During the time of Emperor Ashoka of India, the situation of the Dhamma going down was so bad that there was a lot of corruption, and many people were ordaining as bhikkhus. Many families were sending their children because it simply helped improve their socioeconomic position in life. And many adults were going and ordaining because, hey, I'm getting free food, free clothing, free medicine. Hey, a lot of respect. Even Emperor Ashoka is going to bow down to me. I'm invited to householders for food and everything. So I'm living the life of a luxury, in a sense. And I don't have to work. Hey, many people had joined the Sangha because of that, those reasons. So eventually it came to a boiling point, and Emperor Ashoka took things into his own hands. But prior to him doing that, there was a very distinguished venerable. He was an arahant, Venerable Moggaliputta Tissa Thera. He was not just an idealist, but he lived the Dhamma. He was an arahant. So he was really suffering, also seeing what was happening around him. So he tried to intervene, encourage people, the Sangha, to clean itself up, get a clean act. And finally he gave up, and so he took off and went into seclusion in the mountains. So at that time, Emperor Ashoka as I said, he took things into his own hands, and he started giving royal decree that whoever had suspicious characters, or they pretty much lined up, they put the bhikkhus into like a sifter, a screening process, and anybody they suspected was living a dubious life, pretending to be a bhikkhu, not living the ideals, they were killing them. So they started executing those bhikkhus who were bhikkhus, but they weren't living the life of a bhikkhu. So soon enough, he realized, Emperor Asoka realized, that this is really going out of hand, and this is not good karma for him. After all, he's killing monastics. Good or bad doesn't matter, because he's killing people, which he had sworn he won't do after becoming a Buddhist. At that moment, he was told about Venerable Moggaliputta Thera, and so he sent his messengers begging him to come back to the city, which he did. Venerable Moggaliputta Tissa came, and he was given a royal patronage and support to cleanse the sasana, to cleanse the sangha specifically. And he did. He did. So, but not to the point where whoever did not prove themselves to be living the life of a bhikkhu or had the understanding. So he would ask them certain questions about the Vinaya, obviously the suttas, and if the bhikkhu was seen to be really dedicated, he was kept as a bhikkhu. Otherwise, they were forced to destroy, because there were soldiers with swords drawn. We don't have those now. Good or bad, I leave that to your interpretation. But there isn't that urgency that was there at the time of Emperor Ashoka and Venerable Moggaliputta Tissa. We don't have that. Remember the urbanized world that we're living in, where you have pockets of viharas and temples here, and you have different teachers doing different things, so they're not coming together as we were supposed to in the olden days. And that's a normal process. It's part of the entropy, as we have in thermodynamics, laws of thermodynamics. Things fall apart from a state of orderliness to disorderliness. It's anticipated. And that's why Lord Buddha put in as many precautions as necessary. And that's why he also stated that the sasana has a time span, expiration date, if you will. But we can extend its shelf life, not to be banal, but we can extend it. Again, starting from ourselves, from our lives, from our virtuous behavior, practicing sila, samadhi, panya as lay people, and then anticipating and expecting that from our teachers. Otherwise, why are they teachers? That's another question. Remember the example of the GP or the doctor or the lawyer. You're going there for a specialist to do their specialty. Otherwise, you would go to a shoemaker for legal advice or for medical advice. We don't do that. So we need to keep the same principle applied. So, and the practice part is called patipada. Patipada. There's pariyatti, there's patipatti. So the studying, and then there's also pativeda, of course, which is the higher state. After you're practicing what you've studied, it starts to unfold because your life has become a laboratory. So the cleansing of the Sangha, or the cleansing of the teacher, if you will, starts from within us, each of us, because we are all the custodians. And again, we're not going after teachers in like the Spanish Inquisition type of thing. No. That has so much anger and no. Even while investigating the teacher, we know we should not have pejorative tone. We need to have the respect towards this person, even though we see so many errors. So the person has to be informed that and that you no longer stand for it. That is key. That is key. Otherwise, they'll say, hey, they're seeing this, but they're not saying anything, and I'm getting free food, free lodging, free everything, And I have my green card, I have my citizenship in Europe or in the US, so I'm okay. I'm making enough money so I can send money back to the country, old country, and buying a VR. There's these things happening, and we all see this, but we don't talk about these things. And I like to give it a voice because I don't hear about things of this sort being discussed. So we are obliged, if we're supposed to preserve the Dhamma, we are obliged to protect it, preserving it through our deliberate engagement in life with virtue. Again, no one else's virtue. First, me. Do I keep the 5 precepts as a layperson? Do I? Okay. Am I studying the suttas? Am I understanding? Do I have questions on the suttas? Let me go and find out who can actually help me with them. And I shouldn't shy away. Otherwise, how would we apply the 2 principles that Venerable Sariputta mentioned in the Mahavedalla Sutta, the great discourse on questions and answers? Remember, he said, the thing that leads us and establishes us in right view in Samadhi are 2 things. The voice of another, that's where the teacher comes in, by the way. And Yoniso Manasikara, the wise reflection. Because you're now reflecting on the Dhamma. And the Dhamma cannot just be practiced while you're sitting in the vihara, or even when you're meditating. You carry it in your heart everywhere. The Dhamma is not in the actual suttas. It's not in the actual printed pages, or in some lectures, or in some Dhamma Desana. No. Ultimately, the Dhamma is in our heart, because we carry it with us wherever we go. And that's the perfect and the only good place for the Dhamma to reside. Nowhere else. It doesn't reside inside of 4 walls or a nice, beautiful temple with a big, beautiful statue of Lord Buddha. No. No. The Buddha didn't care. He didn't care for any of those things. You remember Vakkali? Vakkali was a layperson who was so impressed by Lord Buddha's physical beauty and his physique. He left his home, his family, and became a bhikkhu. And he just kept there, sometimes not even eating food for days on end. He would just sit there and be mesmerized by Lord Buddha's demeanor. Until finally Lord Buddha says, Vakkali says, what are you looking at? This decrepit, dirty body? What are you looking at? When you see me, you need to see the Dhamma, he says. Because he says, he who sees the Dhamma sees Lord Buddha, sees me, sees the Tathagata, he says. And Vakkali, of course, is shattered. He wants to commit suicide. And Lord Buddha intervenes and he encourages him, he gives him some Dhamma, and he's inspired. And some years later, before he dies, he attains arahantship. So, and the reason why I say this is because we also have a tendency of looking away from the fact that this teacher doesn't have virtue, doesn't practice, in some cases doesn't even know the Dhamma. But we look away because we say, but look at his personality. I just love him. He's such a, what? There's this phenomenon of worshiping the teacher that's also a problem, a major problem in the sasana today, where the teachers are seen as infallible, unmistakable. No, the Dhamma is unmistakable. The teacher is not. They are mistakable, so long as they're not arahants. So, and we have very good standards as to what we need to see in a person in order for them to be an Arya Savaka. First of all, they cannot break any precept. Even as a Sotapanna, they cannot break any precepts. And if they do, it's by mistake, without knowing, no intentionality. So the Vakali Sutta is very poignant in pulling the rug from under us if we promote the worshiping of teachers. And here, it's not just the responsibility of the teacher, because they're enjoying it. They're getting all the accolades, the attention. They're becoming like a diva, for the community. Oh, the teacher. Oh, the teacher. Oh, do you know this about the teacher? This, I remember when the teacher did this. No. Our teacher is the Buddha. Thank you very much. I can have respect for this teacher, for this Ajahn, for this Thera, Mahathero. But the real teacher is Lord Buddha. That has to be reconfirmed by each of us. Otherwise, we will deify this teacher who had many errors about them. So I love Lord Buddha's words. He says, Alang Vakkali Kinte Imina Putikayena Ditena Yoke Vakkali Dhammang Passati So Mang Passati Yo Mang Passati So Dhammang Passati. Enough, Vakkali, he says. Because he's seeing him sitting there day and night. He's just like mesmerized, looking at Lord Buddha, worshiping him. Why do you want to see this decrepit, dirty body, foul body, he says? The one who sees the Dhamma sees me. He who sees me sees the Dhamma, he says. So let's bring that into our practice, into our life. And that's how the sasana can be alive. And that's not just some practice. There's a difference between the Dhamma, proper Dhamma, not what later on developed into some other things, but the original teachings of Lord Buddha, the one that we see in the Pali Canon. That's what I understand as the Dhamma. That's what I understand as Lord Buddha's teachings. That is complete. Didn't need any more additions over the centuries. Yeah, this was missing it. No. It is not a passive affair. This magga, this path, is not a passive affair. So, and that brings me back to dana, the offering, the generosity, which often is promulgated, supported, and encouraged all around the world, not just in Asia. I've seen this in Europe. I've seen this in different, Western countries. So the dana does not always have to be always about supporting the bhikkhus or the vihara exclusively, or just to to support the temples only. But dana must also be offered to other entities, like organizations that help the elderly, the sick, people who are doing good work, who need money. Because I know people, automatically the tendency is to go ahead and give dana to the temple. And I'm not saying don't do that. Of course, we survive with the support of lay people, but we should think outside the confines of, no, I need to exclusively give dana to the temple. No. You can even give dana to a person, a regular human being that you see needs support. So, for example, you might find someone who is in a lot worse situation than you, maybe someone who is going to undergo surgery. Instead of paying that, $1 million to a temple, also consider maybe spreading that $1 million and giving a portion of that to someone who is unable to pay for their loved one, surgery, operation, and be generous to other people. So dana doesn't recognize color or attire or whether we have hair or not. So because ultimately, when you are opening your resources and sharing them with the world, in this case, a regular person, not a temple per se, you would first be helping them through the practice of metta, karuna, mudita. loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic, altruistic joy. And secondly, you would still be gaining merits, because the person you're offering to is going to feel genuine thanks and appreciation for you. And especially if the person is living a life that is virtuous, now the return is even higher. Because the teacher that you were thinking of giving possibly might not have been living a virtuous life. Let's just be factual here. Okay? So don't be fooled by superficialities or what is observable. We need to, this is where examination comes into full force in your attitude and your accountability. No, I'm going to give this portion to this person because they need it more. And plus, they live a virtuous life. They live a Dhammic life. They have a good lifestyle. Then your merits will be even greater, I will say. Because it is the virtue in the person's heart that counts, not whether a person is a bhikkhu or not. Virtue comes first. And we see countless suttas in just the Anguttara Nikaya, and Book of the Fours, Book of the Five, Book of the Threes, all of this. You have so many examples of Lord Buddha emphasizing the role of virtue in a person, and especially in a bhikkhu's life, in a teacher's life. That must come first. Otherwise, the robes don't make us bhikkhus, by the way. So it's not our shaved heads or the robes that make us holy. That's what I'm trying to say. And the suttas that come to mind, Thera Sutta and Sila Sutta, if you want to go and check. And anyhow, who knows? You might even be, by you helping that person, you might even be helping a noble disciple, an Arya Savaka, a Sekha, someone who is a noble disciple in training, in lay clothing. Basically, they might be Sotapanna, Sakadagamin, Anagamin. They're around, you know. They do exist. So you might be helping them. And guess what? In the Digha Nikaya, we have examples, and also in the Majjhima Nikaya, of how much rewards the person gets when it's incalculable. So let us look at the person's behavior, not their words, or what they're supposed to be representing. Let us look at the facts. So remembering that teachers are there to inspire us, to bring us, inculcate in us the sense of right view, and move away from wrong view that is plaguing us in life. And so we need to be accountable, not to let things slide, and to go back to business as usual. Or I've seen this attitude in some teachers, if not many, of this, following this formula. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. There's that term, phrase in English. So I saw you doing that, I'm not going to say anything, but when you see me doing that, you're not going to say anything, type of a thing. That's not sasana. That's not the Dhamma. Again, this is not just about bhikkhus, of course. This is for teachers, because it is, in fact, even about the kileshas, ultimately, the three poisons in our hearts that we need to get rid of. We shouldn't look at this as this person or that. We're looking at the kileshas. That's the problem. Greed, lust, lobha, hatred, anger, dosa, delusion, moha. Those three are at the crux of the problem. So we're going after that, starting with ourselves. And that is how we can cleanse the Dhamma, we can investigate, and we can bring this to the attention of the teacher. Because who said that the layperson cannot teach a bhikkhu? Remember Chitta? You remember Hattaka Abalavi? You remember Visakha? To name a few. They were teaching Mahatheras.
Sorry, Bhante. I think another late person have to inform you that we have 1.5 hours that just passed by. I think
Ah,
you has you
ah,
haven't been looking at the clock. Yes,
yes.
I also noticed that you haven't had a drink or a sip of water in
Thank
the
you.
last 1.5 hours.
Oh,
Okay.
oh, thank you for
So
that.
just a gentle reminder, Bhante. We have
Thank
passed
you.
1.5 hours. Yeah.
Okay, then I will try to say a few more words and jump into the Q&A because I'm presuming there might be some questions. I hope there are. So this the behavior is what matters, and let's not forget that it's not just human beings that are watching us. The devas are watching us. The real dayakas, by the way. They're the real dayakas. They're the real supporters of the sasana for over 2,600 years. That's why it's still alive. The devas are protecting us, protecting the sasana. And especially they have such high esteem of those of us in robes because many of these devas, they were there at the time of Lord Buddha. They were touching their feet, they were bowing to Lord Buddha, and they were learning. He would teach a portion of the later hours in the day at night. He would teach the devas. So they see our every thoughts, the devas. So we need to be careful of what we're thinking, how we're thinking, even though no one can hear them. And you don't want to discourage the devas because everything they do is geared towards maintaining the sasana. So, because the words of the Tathagata is still fresh in their hearts, because for them, time is like very short. 2,600 years ago, it was like few hours for us. So it's they could still hear the sound of the voice of Lord Buddha's Dhamma desanas reverberating in their hearts and in their ears. So it's still ringing in them. So I would have liked to go on for more because this is a very intriguing subject, but an hour and a half is quite a considerable amount of time. I don't know where time went, it flew. So it's okay for us to shake things up. Remember, our teacher was the most courageous being in the universe, Tathagata, and the Dhamma that he taught. And he left us, he bequeathed to us for us to maintain and protect, is there. And we are its custodian, starting with how we live our lives. And, it's very important for us to acknowledge that and to live according to that. And so accountability is our obligation. And we need to address the situation as we see it's happening. And I will pause here, Brother Leslie, and I could have gone on for another hour, by the way, or two. But please, Brother Leslie, jump in.
Yeah, sure, Bhante. Thank you. I think it's now 4 a.m. for you in Hawaii.
Yeah, 409. Yes.
4:09. Yeah, okay. So you are like one of Buddha's, or rather, you're speaking to the devas. We are not devas, Bhante. It's only 10 p.m. here in Malaysia at the moment.
Oh,
So,
yes.
okay, I have a personal question, Bhante. After hearing what you had to say, many of us live in an urban environment, and most of the temples or the centers that we go to are located in an urban context, right? So we're all subjected to the daily grind and wrongdoings or temptations, if you want to say, So the monks who run these centers are subject to these kind of temptations easily. They see it, they feel it, they experience it themselves. But how would a layperson then go to a monk in an urban area to seek advice or guidance when they know themselves that these monks themselves are not, what's the word, wise enough to teach them, guide them, move them along? Whereas the monks who are actually forest monks, supposedly away from all these temptations, are supposedly better in the sense of mind control and mental cultivation, but we can't have access to them because they are practicing away from humanity or from the urban area. So how do we kind of marry the two, Bhante?
Very poignant question at that. I appreciate the question. The key word you use is supposedly. This is in reference to the bhikkhus in secluded areas, because it is in the heart, the defilements. Because you could be in an urban city, living in very, in the hub of the center of the city, but you could be practicing. We say the Dhamma is akaliko, but it also is practiced everywhere. Despite any kind of circumstances. Of course, the situations, the conditions would become more conducive when a person is in, let's say, the forest or the jungle or in an isolated area. Yes, that's why we like to do retreats in such areas, because it lowers the noise, lowers the exposure to temptations and things like that. Because you could be in the forest, but you could be imagining or thinking about whether you have enough followers on Facebook, because you also happen to have an iPhone. Today, most monks, especially these kids, these young novice monks coming out of Asia, everybody seems to have Facebook accounts for some reason. And why do they even have phones? I don't understand. So it's not just necessarily the urban, but how do you do it? Can you practice at home in an urban environment, despite the fact that, let's say, using your example, the temple monk or monks are not living or exemplifying this, which is, by the way, in majority of the cases. Anywhere, I've seen this everywhere in Asia and in the West. It's the same thing, sadly, and that's the reason why we wanted to do this talk. It starts with the person's practice in the morning or any time of day. So exposure to the suttas is extremely important. One of the reasons why I started doing the Dhammapada recordings was simply to reconnect with the tradition. I have one student who used to go from work to school, and it was a commute of 1 hour drive on LA traffic, Los Angeles, 1 hour. She would start to listen to Dhammapada verses. In fact, in a few months, she finished the whole Dhammapada. And that was reflected directly in her practice. I could see it. Now, she was also going to a temple or this, and she would come and listen to my talks whenever I gave them at the local center in Los Angeles. But her practice was the anchor. And she would come to me asking questions about, let's say, some verse or her meditation. So we shouldn't just look at the temple as the only source. That's what I'm trying to say. Especially if that temple or the personalities inside are not inspiring. But we cannot just completely isolate the temple from our lives either. So I need you to anchor at that point your practice of the Dhamma in your own life, but also go ahead and address the problem with the monks in a nice way, compassionately and with metta. Because what monks are doing in such circumstances, I saw this as fresh as it was like less than a year ago in Europe. People are not coming up to the monk. Like I said, I was visiting in Europe some temples, and the lay people were coming and addressing the problem to me because they knew, I guess, that I was just a visiting monk. So what am I going to do? But at least I was harmless in a sense. But they raised some very crucial points. And I was giving them Dhamma. I was teaching them meditation. But I felt like that's not my job. I'm a monk. Of course I will do it. But I'm a visiting monk. Why shouldn't they feel comfortable approaching their Bhante, who they know much longer than they have known me? They put the money to build the vihara, the temple. They painted the walls. So they need to say those words. And I know sometimes it's a cultural thing, but let's move beyond culture and think about the sasana's health, because it is dying. Okay? We have turned it into rites and ritual business, which is so unfair. That's not the Dhamma. It's not pujas, I say. And I've even had Bhantes, they would laugh and say, "Oh, Bhante, we know, but we have to survive somehow." And they have a point, but we're throwing the baby with the bathwater. We need to really look. Shouldn't give up. And the bhikkhus should go back and have, if the lay people, if the dayakas come and demand, the Bhante, the bhikkhus have to comply, because you are our lifeline. And that's why ultimately we are in an urban area, mind you, because otherwise we're supposed to be in the forest. The reason why we're in an urban area, in a city, is because you're there. You're there. So we need to make the Dhamma available and accessible to you. It's a two-way street. That's why Lord Buddha wanted his bhikkhus to be engaging. That's why we do the Pindapada. That's how it started. So that after the dana, the bhikkhu would give a desana, a teaching of the Dhamma. And if you're not getting it, and it's not just about like some lively, life coaching type of a thing, which is essenceless, which doesn't have any backing of life example of the bhikkhu, then it becomes something different. So the bhikkhu has to be told in such cases that Bhante, we see these things again in private, in a respectful manner, usually done with more than one person. So you have other individuals present, and it's not done in a very cordial, respectful way, in pointing out the discrepancies. And there are people who disrobe. In fact, I've seen some people who disrobe because they leave let's Asia, they come to Europe or Western country, and they see all the temptations, and some of them have the audacity and the courage, especially when someone approaches them and points out certain things, they say, "You know what, this is not working for me," and they disrobe and go and live an honorable lay life and be a lay Buddhist, perfectly honorable, no more pretending. So I encourage lay people to bring this to the forefront instead of hiding it, because Lord Buddha never wanted anyone to cover for him. Never. It wasn't like Mahavira in the Jain tradition, where his students had to, like we see in the Upali Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. Lord Buddha never asked anyone to cover, and no one had the need to cover for him. But sometimes, sadly, I've seen lay people, dayakas, covering up for the monk. That is totally unacceptable. The dayaka should never be ashamed of the monk. Never. You should hold your head up high, because the monk is representing Lord Buddha. This is not delusional. This is not idealistic. This is real. But we make it real because of us having certain standards and expectations, starting with ourselves, supported by our own practice of the precepts, sila, samadhi, panya, ours, and then permeating that into the vihara. And that will be turning the whole vihara into a group of kalyana mittas. Isn't that beautiful? So I would approach that question like that. How is that working for you? The answer I provided.
That's good, Bhante. I think you kind of enlightened me now how to adapt in an urban environment to a situation where we are faced with a monk who's not really very observant of the precepts, of the 227 precepts, but at least maybe we, as you say, we have to voice our concerns
Indeed.
privately to him, or her.
Yes.
Even it could be a bhikkhuni
in
for that
a
matter.
nice way.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Bhante, we have about 6 or 7 questions more.
Please.
So I think you have to pace yourself. But some of them are relevant to today's topic and some are not. So would you like to take all of them?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
what if the speaker swayed from the true Buddha Dhamma and the listeners are not aware of this? Has the speaker commit any sin? We don't have the concept of sin in the Dhamma proper. So what if the speaker swayed from the true Buddha Dhamma and the listeners? This is, again, I remember when I was in the Mahavihara, when I, as an upasaka, I was giving a talk, I was quite delighted because so many questions were coming at me, and really juicy, good questions. And that indicated the level of understanding of the lay community who were thinking, pondering these questions. So what I'm driving at is the person. Let's say I'll use your question as an example. Your question indicates that you would know that the teacher is veering off the Dhamma, is talking about adhamma, or something that doesn't have anything to do with the Dhamma or Lord Buddha, or misrepresenting the Dhamma, and they might not know it. Now, if they know it, of course, they have made, even though we don't call it sin, but it's a very powerful, if they do it intentionally, and they have committed an action that is serious. And unfortunately, we don't have those bodies as we used to, where you would have other bhikkhus who would scrutinize and investigate and call you out later on. And the Sangha would gather and they would address this. And do you remember this? This is, so it's like the trial. So the person has to defend oneself. And at that point, it would become clear. And the Sangha would say, well, because of this, you will be punished. Or punished in the sense, I'm using a Western term, but again, it's not meant to be punitive, to put the bhikkhu back in line to the teaching. Again, if the bhikkhu does this or the teacher does this intentionally. However, if it is a mistake, then please go ahead and raise your hand and say, Bhante, or teacher, if it's a lay person, and point out the error. You shouldn't, be afraid of raising a question if it's based on truth. And that's the wonderful thing about truth. You don't have to remember it. Lies you have to, but not the truth. And not be afraid to, because it shines wherever you put it. So, and the Dhamma is all about the truth. So bringing that up to the attention of the teacher, or if it's a very sensitive arena and you might be afraid that you might be belittling the teacher, go ahead and talk to them afterwards and say, Bhante or teacher, there's this. In this sutta, what you're saying doesn't match. Because there's been a lot of things that were added, even in the Pali Canon. If you see something happening or being mentioned once, usually that was added later. Because, the Dhamma has one flavor, Lord Buddha says. It's like the sea that has a salty flavor. Wherever coast you go to, anywhere, any beach around the world, it will have the same flavor of saltiness. So is the Dhamma. And that is the two things. There is suffering and there is nirodha from suffering, liberation. That's the Dhamma. So encaptured in the Attangika Magga, the Eightfold Path. So always use that as a reference. So I hope that answers that question sufficiently for you. Yes? For a newcomer, what is your advice for one to build up their faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha? Faith is not something that we can go and purchase or get even at a temple. Faith is gained through practice. Of course, sometimes other people inspire us. You can even be inspired from a novel and a book, a character in a book, or a movie even that you've seen. That might be enough to start you on a journey. For example, you say you're a newcomer. Why a newcomer? What brought you in to becoming a newcomer? You see what I'm saying? Something must have triggered you to become a newcomer. But I would encourage you to take that all the way and support that, to cater to it. It's like a seed that you're planting, nourishing it, giving it enough water, some shade, some nutrients, protecting its walls so that it can sprout. So that is like faith, but the faith starts when you practice and start practicing sila, which is the set of 5 precepts: not to kill intentionally, not to harm any beings, not intentionally, not to take anything that is not freely given to you, not to have any sexual misconduct, not to have any like gossiping, slandering, or saying whatever is untrue, especially when there's a benefit somehow for you, and not to engage in any type of intoxicants, things that delude the mind. As you practice this, you start finding on a daily basis, of course, it's a training. So it's not like the commandments that you have in Judeo-Christian religions. It's a practice of training yourself. And sometimes you're going to falter. You're going to break them. And that's fine. You retake them right on the spot. That teaches you forgiveness and tolerance of the fact that you are not perfect. So starting from there, you develop this sense of metta towards yourself. And as you're doing this, automatically faith starts warming up. It's like the 2 pieces of dry wood that you rub against at a certain frequency with certain intensity and pressure. All of a sudden, you're going to find smoke. Embers will form, and you have a fire. So it's daily practice. Now, as you're doing that, it's important for you to position yourself around people that we call kalyana mittas, who are on the same journey as you, going through their journeys, but collectively having a same purpose. So as you're doing that, you inspire each other. It's like the 2 candles, small candles in a dark, 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 huge hall. All of a sudden, that one candle, because there's another candle, it becomes brighter. And then you put another candle, another candle. All of a sudden, the whole room is bright, even though the candle by itself would think of itself as like, I'm insignificant. So you see, it's a multifaceted answer, as demonstrated by your practice, which has to be consistent. And the other thing that really helps your faith to grow tremendously and exponentially fast is going to the suttas. And that's another reason why I'm voice recording, because most people don't have the time to read, and many of the suttas have missing parts. Many of the suttas in English today, I rarely come across a sutta that has all of it. So make sure that listening to the Dhamma is really, really beneficial for you. And it is. So, but you have to give yourself that time. Like I mentioned that story about one of my students who really, she still listens to the suttas, and I have other students around the world that are very thankful of the work that is being done. And of course, if you're not into the listening, you could do the reading. But I love the listening part. You can hit play and you just don't worry about it. So someone, a supporter, is trying to put it on podcast also, because currently it is on YouTube. Because I wanted it to be there even when I'm no longer alive. I wanted the Pali Nikayas to be there, the ones I've recorded after I'm gone. So you can even use that as a tremendous, beneficial, nutritious soil for your faith to grow. So I hope that helps.
Bhante, can you tell the audience what is the name of your YouTube channel, Bhante?
Yes, it's thank you for that. It's under my name, Candana Bhikkhu. That's the keyword. Candana is spelled like it's spelled here, Candana, without the H. It's a Pali name, Candana. Bhikkhu, it's spelled Bhikkhu. Bhikkhu. Candana Bhikkhu. And in some cases, I've seen it come up, even if you put, let's say, the sutta name, if I've already recorded it, it shows up. And that is my email, bhantechandana@gmail. Of course, aside from the suttas that I am adding, currently I'm almost halfway through the Anguttara Nikaya. Yes, Candana Bhikkhu, but there's a space in between. Candana Bhikkhu. So aside from the suttas, there's also numerous Dhamma talks I've given over the years, both as an upasaka and as a bhikkhu as well. Yes, that is it. That's perfect. That is the Chandana Bhikkhu. The key word, if you put those, it should show up. Another question, Brother Leslie. Hi, Bhante. Some sutta speak of bad deeds done to monks could lead us to hell, and we have no way to tell if the monk is a genuine or a fake. How to take a risk going to hell to confront them? Well, if you are living your life according to the Dhamma, according to Sila, Samadhi, Panya, you won't have to worry about sending yourself or the monk, because there's been arahants who have the eye, and as one of the three knowledges in becoming an arahant, you see, other than the first one is seeing your own past lives, but the second knowledge is seeing where other beings are reborn after their death. And some arahants have said the hell realms are full of monastics. So, but as far as and these are not just good monks also. So I would be more concerned about you and your level of purity of living a virtuous life. So if you're living a virtuous life, because unless you have the ability to see the mind of the monk, we call it blending your mind with the mind of another, which is like telepathy. Unless you have that skill, you would be able to see the mind of the bhikkhu and see. But if you control your thoughts, what kind of thoughts I'm entertaining, is it wholesome or unwholesome? Is it kusala or akusala? Or if your speech is kusala or akusala, or physical action is kusala, akusala, you wouldn't worry about a thing, because you're living a virtuous life. And if you're living a virtuous life, even if you so happen to make a mistake, you cannot go to hell realms for that. Okay? So I wouldn't be concerned about that. And many of these suttas have been added later on, because it is the virtue that makes a person holy, not what we wear. Because sometimes we think that, oh, because it's in the suttas, or the teacher is saying it, then it has to be completely true. Well, that's where we need to use our wisdom. Remember, our path is different than other religious paths, or even later developments of Buddhism. It's different because it requires us to use reason, common sense. Okay? Virtue is number one, not how I look from you. Different how we look from each other. It's not that. Of course, my life as a bhikkhu, the bhikkhu's life, you have to, especially if they're living with purity, that's what makes the bhikkhu's life virtuous, ultimately. Like Brother Leslie was saying, sometimes you have questionable characters in robes. What do you do? I mean, that's a fact. We see this, so we shouldn't hide this. Everyone else sees that, because it's really shameful for us, and embarrassing, to be exact, when other people who are not in the faith, in the practice, in the sasana, see things that we find to be insulting or bad in, let's say, a teacher, and they see that and they spread the word around. Now, is that harmful or good for the sasana? Of course it's harmful. So, but had I gone and spoken to the bhikkhu in a respectful way, with metta, now, that doesn't mean that they're going to accept it either, because there's a lot riding on it, because they're getting fame, food, free, this and that. Who knows? Because everybody's coming from different angles. So I would count on your virtue. So long as you're protecting yourself with virtue, that's not going to happen, that scenario. And with virtue comes also your practice of meditation and your development of wisdom. Those things will take you to the stage of Sotapanna, which is a stream winner or stream enterer. You attain that state, you will never ever go into any of the lower realms. I think that's a good deal, right? So I would focus on doing that. So focus on your virtue, development of that, and whatever they do, fine. You bring it to their attention. And if they have any decency and common sense, they will listen to you and make some changes, especially if you're supporting them, right? Otherwise, what I noticed also is a lot of places, the dayakas and the supporters were pulling away because of the things that were talked about, because they see it. And they're also, their children are saying, Dad, Mom, I don't want to go there because I see this guy doing this and that. Or I don't like this. I'm not gaining anything. It's just puja, puja, puja. What is this? So it's not relevant to their lives. So many people are pulling away, and the sasana also suffers because of that. Now, the dayakas or the supporters, you are not going to suffer because of the bhikkhu's mistake by going to hell because of their mistake, I mean. But they are also causing such characters, such teachers, also because of their not practicing the three trainings, sila, samadhi, panya, living a virtuous life, they cause harm and suffering in the life of the people because they create confusion. But I'm asking you, encouraging you to take charge of your own path, irrespective of that teacher or the bhikkhu. Take charge of your life by practicing the path on your own. And there are teachers out there in the world, good bhikkhus, quite a number of them, and you can access them. Or even if you can't find any, okay, you have the suttas, you have Lord Buddha. You use the suttas to inspire you. Okay? So I would answer your question like that. I hope it was satisfactory. Some Buddhists study Buddhism and regard the Dhamma as a subject and knowledge, but lack commitment to practice the teaching of the Buddha to end dukkha and samsara. Your comments, please. Thank you, Bhante. It's ego. It's an ego trip. So whether the person was collecting cars or collection of, I don't know, houses or clothing or anything, easily, when the Dhamma is viewed as something as superficial as that, it can easily turn into a different manifestation of collection of cars. I'm not being banal here because, there's a reason why you asked this question, because you've seen this, and I've seen this as well. So it's just an ego trip, because instead of collecting this or collecting stamps, the person, at least you can actually sell the stamps, or sell the cars or sell the houses, and you can make a good return on your, investment. But what are you going to do with the Dhamma that you just collected? It's right. It's very much like regurgitated. I like to call it. It's a pretty graphic image, but I call this regurgitated vomit. Someone else's regurgitated vomit that it's now in your system. That's how sad it is, because the person is wasting time reading commentaries, and they themselves have become commentators. And the commentators, what are they doing? They're commenting on other people who never practiced. So it becomes an about, quote unquote, about business. Well, that's not the Dhamma. See, years ago, one of my teachers said, a person who doesn't practice and just knows a lot of Dhamma is like a person who is suffering from a serious disease. Let's say a nasty kind of cancer, terminal. And let's say there is a cure. And the person goes to see the doctor, and the doctor gives them the prescription for this medicine. Now the person says, I have the prescription. I have the prescription. I have the cure for my terminal illness. This is going to cure me. And he takes, or she takes, that piece of paper, and they go to the print shop. They Xerox it. They copy it. They, in fact, make it larger. They make it into a huge billboard. And they laminate it, and they carry it over their head, and they say, this is my cure for my terminal cancer. This is it. I found the cure. Is that going to stop them from dying from the cancer? Why? because they didn't take the medicine. So who cares if I have a PhD in Buddhism? Who cares? What matters is, what am I doing with it? You have tons and tons of examples of this at the time of Buddha, the teacher. In fact, there's one place where one particular bhikkhu who was Mahathira, and he had studied and he was known as a teacher. But many of his students had become arahants, and he hadn't even attained a single jhana. He didn't know how to sit and meditate. So every time he would go to the Lord Buddha's presence, and the Buddha would basically mock him. He would call him like names, like the idiot or the stupid man, or the, he would have different terms. I can't remember, but it was not flattering. And he would feel so embarrassed, and he would get up, drooping his head, and run away, until finally, as my mother used to say, the knife hit the bone. When you're like, it reached a point of, okay, I can't stand this anymore. I have to do something. And Lord Buddha sends him to a teacher. And that teacher doesn't want to teach him, because they know that he's full of ego, arrogant. And he goes from one teacher to another until he ends up with a little child who's a novice. And that child, who's an arahant, by the way, teaches him, but make sure that he teaches him with some discipline to crush his ego. So unfortunately, the knowledge can also work against us, because it can keep us in the mire, in the mud of delusion, because we think, oh, I know Dhamma. No, you don't know anything. You just have regurgitated vomit in your gut. That's it. It's not even digested, because you're never applying it. What good is that? At least if I go and study, I don't know, welding or weaving, I'm doing something good with my life for myself. Now, of course, this teacher might say certain things, like that example of a bhikkhu who was a teacher who had students who became arahants. They might say something that can get the student to really develop, and that has to do with the student. But as far as that person goes, it's a wasted life, as far as I'm concerned. So I hope that is satisfactory to your question. I have been listening to the Dhamma. I am still having doubt on the idea of the Deva, Naga, different planes of existence and rebirth. Should I investigate them further until I clear those doubts, or just focus on cultivation of the mind through meditation and try to follow the Noble Eightfold Path, which I believe will be more fruitful path? Absolutely. I agree with you. I would focus more on the practice, because I also used to be a high school teacher, and the subject that I used to teach was science. In fact, different disciplines of science: physical science, general science, astronomy, biology, life sciences, etc., advanced biology. So I was very science oriented. So I needed to see things, I need to experience things in order for me to validate it through my own observation, through my own experimentation, in order for me to say, okay, this is true. And I would also have major problems with the devas and nagas and rebirth. So I would just skip those parts. I didn't belittle the suttas, but I always felt like, nah, this is not working for me. But just those parts I would like, until the day comes where I know this for sure. Thanks to your practice, you can get to a point where you will be able to validate these things for yourself. I hope that helps. I will leave it at that. And the Dhamma is complete. It is complete. And we have to test it in order for us to taste it first. So be cognizant of that. And if you put the effort, you will get your answers. Okay? So I hope you were able to extract a good response from that. Dear Bhante, how can we keep our mind clear and understand the Dhamma properly? Our mind jumps around from thoughts to thoughts. Thank you. Yes. And that is what makes it a beautiful challenge. Nothing you're able to do today, those words that you typed just now, You weren't able to do that. Many of us here probably speak English as our second language, which means that it wasn't even our native language, which means that we had another language that we had to learn, which means we didn't know that either when we were born. All of these things came through effort, consistency, and frequency of doing it. Most of us can walk, unless we deal with some physical problem. All of us can walk. We're bipeds. Were we able to walk immediately after birth? No. We had to spend quite a number of years, or months rather, and then we had to struggle to get up, and fall, get up. Just like the English that you had to learn, ABCs, and then the meaning of words, and then formulating them into sentences. All that is similar to the structure of creating a good discipline that will allow you to see the benefit of your practice in a living sense, with a living example in your life. And that is how I would approach this. So it means that you need to practice what? Something as simple as using an object of meditation that works best for you. So the simplest one is observing your breath. Right now, let's say your mind is jumping around, as you said. I was helping a student yesterday by telling her about this technique, which I came up with years ago in therapy. Because I'm a therapist, I used to help people, and I was helping. I think it was a teenager who had gotten herself into so many different problems. The mind was the quintessential monkey, jumping from branch to branch type of a mind. So imagine this. So imagine your hand. So breathing in, and you can do this any time of day, and no one has to know you're doing this. So you don't have to hold your hand either like this. I'm just demonstrating, that's why. So I'll use this hand, it's better. So with inhale, imagine you're rising up. Inhale and exhale. Do it slow. Inhale, exhale. And like this all the way until you reach number 5. And by the time you're done, there's less monkeys jumping on the branches. Maybe no monkeys. And the more you do this, and sometimes you'll get really into it and you'll say, oh, I want to do the other hand too. Oh, I want to also do my toes. Especially if you're in a meeting or a difficult professional setting, challenges in life, you can use that. Now, of course, you don't have to use your hands all the time, like I said, but you can also use the breath. And we use this area right here, the upper lip portion between the nostril, the base of the nose, and the upper lip. And just to observe the breath coming in and see, don't follow it into the body, but just feel the sensation. Feel the sensation. See if it's warm or cold. Is it short or long? Is it smooth or is it interrupted, broken? So it's practice. So don't expect there to all of a sudden be incredible. Nobody gave you the English language like you know it now. You have to work for it. And if this is the most important thing in our lives, practicing and gaining the fruits of the Dhamma, then it's going to take some time at least. But it's not going to take that long. Even if you do one hand like that, you will see, guaranteed, as long as you're not going somewhere else. But just staying with that. Inhale with the rise, exhale. Inhale, exhale. So that will benefit you. I also have put up, I made 3 videos in English. I call them self-soothing exercises. I've done it for depression, anger, and anxiety. And they are also on my YouTube channel under self-soothing playlist. So it's there, and they're approximately 20 minutes. So you could use those as well to calm you. So you can use guided meditation temporarily and then allow yourself become more comfortable into practicing the meditation proper. So I hope that was helpful. The next question.
Bhante, we'll take the last question and we will end for tonight, Bhante.
Yes. How do we thank the devas who have been protecting the Buddha Sasana? I love this question. Smiling is a good thing. Because our planet is not necessary, or even being a human being is not very appealing to the devas. It's actually smelly. It's dirty. Even if you showered 7 times in a row and you've decked yourself in the most delicious smelling fragrances, and it's still, compared to where they come from, and I'm talking about the lowest level of devas. So it's not very attractive for them to come and visit us. But when they see a smile that is pure and genuine, especially if it has a loving kindness attached to it, it's moving you, it's giving you goosebumps. You feel the smile from the bottom of your feet up to the tips of your hair. That alerts them that there's something unusual going on this planet, and they are immediately next to you, around you, especially when they hear someone uttering the words of Lord Buddha. Because you have certain devas, especially, who are good Buddhists, shall we say, and many of them are very advanced, but they're very humble as well, and they're very eager to come and help. So to thank them, every time you're keeping your precept, when you could have easily done the thing that you normally would have done, let's say breaking a precept of speaking or lying, and you held yourself back, that creates a certain energy around you, a certain force field, if you will. And that's purifying the mind. And as I was mentioning to the other question, when the mind becomes less and less like a monkey, meaning your mind becomes more and more calm, more relaxed and more serene, that corresponds to the level of mental state that devas are in. Especially when we practice the Brahma Viharas, which are Metta, Karuna, Mudita, and Upekkha, loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. So that's one of the reasons why I highly recommend doing Metta Bhavana. And I also have a video on this I've done in one of my talks in that YouTube channel under, when I was a layperson, actually, I explained it. But I go over it in different talks, even as a bhikkhu. So that also shows the devas that you're appreciating them. And of course, doing your morning chant. I'm not against chanting, by the way. It's just how much emphasis is being placed on it. So when you're saying Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato, and then you're taking the Panchasila, that really is something that makes the devas very happy. But one particular sutta that they really like, and they call other devas to come, hey, come. There's a person here practicing this chant. And that is the chant on the Brahma Viharas, which is not very long. It's Metta sagatena cetasa ekam disang paritava viharati tata dutiyang tata tatiyang tata chatutang iti uttamado tiriyang sabati sabatataya sabhavantang lokang Metta sagatena cetasa vipulena mahagatena apamanena my brain just stopped. Sorry, I became emotional also. It's a beautiful sutta and they love it. And so that's another way to thank the devas. And also always have in mind, when you're being generous, share the merits of that dana, or even your meditation. I teach my students to always share their merits of the meditation practice with the devas and all their relatives, parents, and everyone. So I hope that answers your question sufficiently.
Thank you, Bhante. I think you have done excellent work this evening. So you're quite obviously not somebody that we will investigate. And I think you're not going to sleep this tonight. I think it's almost 5 a.m. for you, I think. And it's No
Who,
sleep for you tonight in
uh,
Hawaii.
it's who needs coffee when you have the Dhamma?
Exactly. And I'm quite amazed too, because Bante, our audience, the numbers after 2.5 hours almost, the numbers have not dropped, and they are still with us and still asking questions,
Oh,
posting comments on our Facebook pages.
wonderful.
Let me see whether there's anything else. Okay, I think that's the end. I think people are also getting tired. So
Mm.
we've come to the end of this evening's Dhamma sharing, Bante. So before we end, I would like to invite Bante to conduct the Anumodana to the
Mhm.
Devas and the dearly departed.
Mhm.
Bante.
Mhm. Akasatha Chibumata Devanagamahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakkantu Lokasasanam. Akasatha Chibumata Devanagamahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakkantu Desanam. Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mamparanti Ettavata Chamhehi Sambadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Ettavata Chamhehi Sambadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya ettavata chamhehi sambadang punya sampadang sabbe sattanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya sadhu sadhu sadhu.
Thank you, Bante. Thank you for conducting the Anumodana. We have come almost to the end of this evening's Dhamma sharing. Before we end, I would just like to inform all our viewers and the audience. Now, Bante is actually currently living alone in Hawaii. He doesn't have a center. He rents an apartment, I believe. Bante, you're renting an apartment, right? And he has to bear all the expenses on his own. So we have actually discussed with Bante on the possibility of inviting Bante to come to Malaysia and spend some time with us here at the Buddhist Mahavihara. And I think Bante is considering that seriously, that option. But in the meantime, there's still another 4 to 5 months more. So for those of you who would like to help Bante, you can contact Bante at the email address that's scrolling at the bottom of the screen. And maybe you can forward your contributions or perikara to Bante, and he will advise you best how to make the donation. So Bante, this is a small little ad I'm running for you to help you the next
Yeah.
couple of months. And if you do consider coming to Malaysia, and we do confirm that, it'll be a great sacrifice for us. And we look forward to having you and hosting you in Malaysia. And I think we look forward to your guidance if you're here at Malaysia, and especially at Buddhist Mahavihara. So before we end, Bante, after 2.5 hours, let me take this opportunity on behalf of the monks and the Committee of Management of the Buddhist Mahavihara to thank you graciously for taking time off and especially sacrificing your sleep this evening to be with us and sharing the Dhamma. And I think we have all really are blessed and are grateful to you for sharing your knowledge and your experiences as far as how do we investigate a teacher, because we all need teacher and guidance. And I think sometimes we get lost in the flow, right? So I think thank you for bringing this difficult subject into the open, and so that we have some better understanding of how to uh, veer this path, difficult path that we are faced with. We look forward to Bante. Bante will be speaking with us again on the 26th of September, end of the month. I think it's a Sunday. And I think Bante will be talking on how do we attain Nibbana in this age of cell phones. I think that's the topic we have. Yeah, another interesting topic. So how do we achieve Nibbana in this cell phone age, when everybody is actually just glued to their handphone screens? Uh, no, no mindfulness at all. So just mindful of the phone. So let's explore that as well on the 26th of September. So we look forward to having each and every one of you joining us, and to all of you from TBCM who are joining us from the TBCM Facebook page as well. as the Buddhist Mahavihara Facebook pages. Thank you and have a pleasant evening. Sadhu.
Sukhi Hot.
Sukhi Hot Bhante.